Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football, getting you set for my favorite offseason project. It's ranking the conferences. So, what we do before we actually look at the results from 2018 and put them into context and what they really mean, we go through a little fun exercise here where basically I take every Power 5 league and I seed the teams, not based on my opinion, but based on the standings. So the seedings come out and I match up the teams in all the Power 5 leagues. So check out the previous videos where we matched up the Pac-12 against the other conferences, the ACC, the Big Ten, the Big 12, and the SEC. Now we've moved on to the Big Ten against the SEC. And of course, many of these matchups would change the next week. You know, so-and-so could play so-and-so and you get a result, but if they played again and again and again, you would get a different result. So I decided a couple of years ago, let's do a 10-game series. Instead of just saying who would win the Ole Miss-Oklahoma State game, yeah, we can make an estimation on that, but you make a differentiation between dominant matchups, dominance of one team over another, versus, hey, this is a toss-up. This is going to be a 5-5 or 6-4 series. And it gives a little bit more of a big picture look and a fuller picture of a look at the conferences. Again, check out the previous videos. Now, this is not the nuts and bolts metrics of what I'm going to do later, because once we get done with playing Fantasyland, what we're going to do is basically grind through the results of the Power 5 conference games against each other, the non-conference games in the regular season and in bowl play, put that into context. So just hang on if you have yet to run through an off-season with Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football, and we will bring you a closed experiment that means a whole lot in rating and evaluating these conferences. Again, this is all fun. We even set up the set for exclusively the SEC and the Big 12. Here we go. Unfortunately, again, because the Big 12 only has 10 teams, we've got to exclude 4 teams from the SEC. So we do that fairly by taking the top 2 from the SEC, then taking a team out, taking another 2, taking a team out, taking 2, taking a team out, etc., and it works out perfectly. So the teams we miss, I believe, would be Kentucky, who was the 3 seed. We've got Tennessee out of it and a couple other teams. As I scan through, I'm trying to think what other teams in the SEC we didn't find. But anyway, we took out 4 teams from the SEC. All right. So we match them up against the Big 12, and this is what we've got. Let's keep in mind that the Big 12 fared well against the SEC. They played 6 times, and of course it was highlighted by that Texas win over Georgia, in which the Longhorns dominated the Sugar Bowl, ended up winning by a score 28-21. West Virginia over Tennessee in the opener. Not necessarily a fair fight. One of the better teams in the Big 12 taking on a lesser team in the SEC. You had Baylor and Vanderbilt, a bowl matchup that came down to the wire with Baylor winning. And then the 4th Big 12 win was an upset. Oklahoma State upsetting Missouri in a bowl game in an exciting offensive explosion. And the Tigers were a 9-point pick over the Cowboys in that game. 2 wins for the SEC, Mississippi State over Kansas State, 34-10. And you had Ole Miss over Texas Tech in Week 1 in a 2-score win for the SEC. Here we go. And if I can get out of the way and you can see the results there, we've got, of course, Alabama and Oklahoma. I think these 2 teams have played. Let's try to make something out of the game that we saw. We saw Alabama come out of the gate and just pound Oklahoma physically, dominate them, overwhelm them, take a 28-0 lead. So how much of the Oklahoma comeback was reality versus how much of it was just Alabama backed off? Well, I think a little bit of both. I think Oklahoma would fare fairly well in a series against Bama. Bama's decidedly the better team in my eyes. They win a 10-game series at 7-3. Then you've got Georgia and Texas. Wow, we got another matchup. Okay, let's understand here. Absolutely, Texas outplayed them from start to finish. Won the game. It was not a fluke win in any way, shape, or form. But let's take into consideration that 2 years ago, Syracuse beat Clemson, that Pitt beat Clemson, that Iowa and Purdue beat Ohio State. If those 2 teams played 10 times, would Purdue or Iowa beat Ohio State the majority of the games, or Pitt or Syracuse beat Clemson the majority of the time? No, they wouldn't. So I believe Georgia wins this series over Texas 6-4. All right, we also have Iowa State and Florida. Interesting series. I would love to see some of these matchups. We don't have enough non-conference big matchups in college football. Gators win at 7-3. West Virginia, LSU, I think that would be fascinating as well. And again, let's take into consideration, West Virginia did not have their full complementary of offense with Will Greer out, two of their top 3 receivers, and their left tackle in the bowl loss to Syracuse. These teams are fully stocked. 2018, everyone's healthy, everyone's eligible and playing. But LSU, with the defense and with the superior athletic ability across the board, wins over West Virginia 6-4. We've got Mississippi State taking on TCU. TCU, that limited offense they had in 2018, would come back to bite them against an outstanding Bulldog defense, and the Bulldogs win at 7-3. Baylor, Missouri, I like Mizzou to win it 6-4. What's interesting here is Missouri actually, as we noted, played a weaker-seeded Oklahoma State team and lost to them. But it was one game, and the seedings got kind of funky down at the bottom of the Big 12, and we'll explain in just a second. Mizzou over Baylor 6-4. Auburn, Kansas State. I think it's a mismatch. Auburn just didn't get their team together this year. They lost a lot of close games. They lost to really good teams like LSU, Mississippi State, and Alabama. They beat Washington, the Pac-12 champion. Auburn crushes Kansas State 8-2. Vandy, Texas Tech, entertaining series. I like Vandy's total team effort over Texas Tech in this one, 6-4. This is where I think the Big 12 jumps out here. Oklahoma State basically finished as the 9 seed in the Big 12, if you can believe that. They came within a point of beating Oklahoma. They beat Texas. They beat Boise State by 3 scores. They beat Missouri. A ton of big wins for Oklahoma State on the season. But they also tripped up against a bunch of teams. They finished 3-6 in the Big 12. And because they lost to Texas Tech and Kansas State and Baylor, they lose out on the tie-breaking system, and they're seeded that low. Oklahoma State beats Ole Miss in this series 7-3. Kansas, Arkansas, I got to tell you, I didn't know what to do with that. They're both lousy. Kansas much better than they've been in the past. Arkansas has been taking a tumble for the last few years, going from a fringe top 25 team under Brett Bielema to a disaster in year 1 under Chad Morris. So that's a 5-5 series. Final score for the SEC, 61-39. SEC wins over the Big 12. But keep in mind, Big 12 fans, I respect your win 4-2 over the SEC this year. I just don't think it would last over the entirety of a season. And keep in mind, you got to almost toss out the West Virginia-Tennessee game because West Virginia, one of the better teams in the Big 12, Tennessee, one of the worst teams in the SEC. So there you have it. The others were fair fights, though, and the Big 12 won 3 of the other 5. So the Big 12, probably the worst conference in college football a few years ago, 2014, 15, 16 range, has bounced back and is very competitive. My thoughts on the Big 12 versus the SEC, again, we're actually going to take the results from 2018 here very soon after we complete this project. We want to get your take on these 10-game series. Who would you like to see play out of those matchups? Who also would you like to see play out of the SEC versus the Big 12, period? Maybe you'd like to see Oklahoma and Georgia play again, or Oklahoma, Florida, or see LSU and Texas play, which they are going to play, of course, early in 2019. Let's talk about it right here at the best place for discussion, debate, and analysis of college football. Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football.